It was noon of a hot, cloudless day in the late July. Veasy was 100 years from the cabin by the dead cottonwood, watching a woodpecker fly in and out of a hole in the tree, feeding grubs and other morsels to the fledglings in the nest. Suddenly he turned away from the tree and ran helter-skelter for the cabin. He reached the door, puffing and panting, eyes agape. Then looking back over his shoulder, he panted, "Someone, come!" A horse and rider emerged from the timber, hesitated a few seconds at the edge of the clearing, as if undescribed whether to keep coming or turn back into the forest. I solved the problem for him by waving a hand and shouting, "Hello there!" and speaking low and smoothingly to his horse, which reared up on its hind legs at a sudden sign of me. The rider neck-reined the animal toward the cabin. Our visitor was a full-blooded Indian, one whom I didn't remember ever seeing around Creek. Later we found out that he belonged to the Anaheim Reservation, which lay a good many miles west of Meldrum Lake. He was wearing heavy moose-skin chaps and a buckskin coat with long fringes at the shoulders and sleeves. The coat was spotlessly clean except for a smear or two of blood on the right sleeve, and since the carcass of a freshly killed deer was tied behind the saddle, the blood no doubt had a legitimate excuse for being there. The Indian was short and blocky, and his face betrayed nothing of what was taking place within his mind. Smiling a welcome, I pointed to a tree and said, "Pretty quick we eat. More better you tie your horse up and come eat too." Then the Indian's sphinx-like face relaxed in an easy grin. "Thank you," he grunted, coming down from the saddle. Our visitor didn't seem to have very much to say for himself. When forced to converse in the primitive form of English, the true Chilcotin Indian is frugal with his words. Such little talk as did take place centered on game in one form or another. "Lots of coyote tracks up in creek bottom." I began an effort to unlimber his tongue. "You betcha. Coyote him buggered to kill young duck and goose, now no more. Water stop in creek." Although the Indian lacked proper understanding of the word bugger, which the white man had introduced to his vocabulary, he guessed that it meant something bad. After a moment or two of deep contemplation, the Indian asked, "How much you think?" "Four buyer pay one good coyote skin. Bimeby he get prime." I grinned. "For buyer, he cheat trapper to beat hell. Suppose one pale silky pelt worth $10 cash. Fur buyer at store, give you $7. Worth trade goods for it." It was the Indian's turn to laugh now. "Ah yeah, fur buyer, he buggered to cheat." The deer on his saddle prompted me to ask, "You see much deer sign in timber where you ride?" He nodded. "Lots. Him up and down creek. Try to find water. Fly give him hell now. And deer lie down in water with just his head stick out. That's why fly can't hurt him." In discussing wildlife of any kind, even with an Indian, it is hard to avoid the word water. In summer, water offers the mule deer their only means of escape from the persecution of the flies. There in the water of the creek or lake, the deer will lie for most of the day, with just its nose and ears protruding above the surface. Not until shadows begin to lengthen and the cooling winds of the night take over from the ardent heat of the day will the deer leave water's edge and return to the timber to feed. After filling his belly and belching, the Indian grunted a thank you to the tobacco and cigarette papers as shoved across the table, and rolled himself a smoke. Between long and thoughtful puffs of the cigarette, there are more small talk of the deer, moose, and other meat animals of the forest. Meat was the prime essential of any Chilcotin Indian's life. Money he could get along without for weeks at a time. But meat he and his family must have, whether they made an overnight camp. Consequently, little or anything else ever occupied their thoughts. We were slowly acquiring much of the Indian's philosophy ourselves. It had its points at that. The Indian was in no hurry to go, now that he got acquainted. After finishing his cigarette, he went outside and squatted on a block of wood, firing quick glances at the cabin, the wagon, at me and at Lillian and Veasy. If deep within his mind he was wondering why we are here and what we were doing, he didn't bother to ask. Finally he got up and said, "Me go my camp now." The inquisitiveness of the white man now has asserted itself. "Whereabouts your camp?" I asked with curiosity. With a jerk of a thumb into the north, he mumbled, "There." And since there was surrounded by several 100,000 acres of timber, muskeg and pothole meadow, I was none the wiser for the question. But we couldn't altogether shut ourselves off from the remainder of the world. That wouldn't be fair to Veasy. He had to learn that there were other people in the world beside his mother and father. So once a month, anyway, I wrangled the work team from the pasture and hitched them to the wagon, and we drove out to the Creek. These rare trips to the post office were events of a huge delight to Veasy, since they held a certain promise of candy. It was a promise never denied him, even though its fulfillment did entail the serious economic matter of filching another precious 2 bits from the pocketbook. But youth must be served. Even the Indian children knew all about the large wooden candy buckets that the trader kept under the counter. Their method of making trade consisted of poking a finger into their mouths and banging a 5 or 10-cent piece down the counter. In winter, a weasel pelt was apt to suffice for the coinage. After attending to Veasy's trade and purchasing another pound of tea or a couple of tins of tobacco, I gave my attention to the mail. Any letters smacking of importance? There were few of these. I dealt with then and there, availing myself to the trader's noisy typewriter to do so. Then preached on the counter I glanced through the papers. There was little of good cheer to be found there. The activities of Austrian named Hitler seemed worthy of a little space in the large provincial dailies. But who in the hell was Hitler? "A house painter," snorted Beecher in reply. "Yes, sir, a goddamn Austrian house painter who reckons he's another Bismarck." The trader had a radio in his office that, between prolonged fits of static, gave forth some music and news commentaries. Possession of the radio made the trader a veritable prince of learning. Indians consulted him on whether it was a good hunting moon or a bad one. If a rancher was out 9 yearling steers on a fall roundup, he sought advice from the trader as to their possible whereabouts. And a homesteader's wife from up the creek a piece, who'd begat 6 sturdy sons in 7 years of effort and was now bloated for the 7th time, consulted Beecher as to whether this time it would be a girl or a boy, and the radio told all. No, there was little of good cheer in the papers. Several thousand unemployed rioting in the streets of Vancouver. Several millions without work in those United States of America. If that was a world of civilized man, the sooner we got back to our trapline, the better. The matter of when to start back was usually left to Lillian. It would be at least 3 to 4 weeks before we came out to Rice Creek again. And now that we are here, I didn't want to hurry her about getting back. But after a couple of days of drinking tea and eating fruitcake with Mrs. Beecher and talking about all the mysterious things that women generally talk about when 2 of them are together, Lillian stated bluntly, "I'd like to go home." And as if that wasn't maybe quite enough, she added, "There's hay to think about." I swear that no sooner had Lillian gotten one job off her mind than she began thinking about another. And perhaps it is just as well that this was so. I was sometimes slightly inclined to put things off, for a day or two anyway. But she was right. Before September's shortening days brought the first really heavy frosts of fall, we had to have winter feed for our horses. The horses were our only means of contact with the outside, unless we cared to make a 50-odd mile return trip on snowshoes afoot. Hay of a kind, like so much else, was there for the taking on a small beaver meadow a step or upstream from the cabin. We could cut a half-dozen tons of slawgrass hay, which, if lacking the quality of timothy or clover, would keep flesh upon animals' ribs until the backbone of the winter was broken, a new grass in sight. We had no horse mower and rake and didn't know where we could borrow them. For now, every mower and rake in the land was busy piling up hay against the hungry mouths ahead. But we had outfitted ourselves with scythe and large and clumsy hand rake and pitchfork. And of course, we had 14 hours of light each day in which to use them. I wielded the scythe, and if this was one mowing machine with which I'd had no previous experience, the compelling needs of the moment soon taught me how. After a couple of days of wrecking backache, I began to attain a sort of proficiency with the scythe, and each time the blade whizzed through the air, a swath of bright green hay lay wilting in its back trail. As the hay cured, Lillian came behind with a rake and pitchfork, piling it up in cocks. And as often as not, as soon as cock was built, Veasy turned somersaults on it, knocking it to pieces. Between the two of us, we made a rack out of dried poles and pegged it to wooden runners, then hitched the team to the primitive though very efficient vehicle and hauled the hay and stacked it by the house. The summer waned. Fall stalked down upon us. The aspen and willow leaves traded their green for rusty gold. September gave us few days of light, rain, and once more a trickle of water slithered down the creek. October's raw winds brought flocks of sandhill crane and Canada geese to the scene, noisy as noisy can be, as they circled the lake by the house. Southward bound were the cranes and the geese, and if the former seldom stopped to visit a while, the geese were more neighborly. They squatted down on the lakes in large, gossiping flocks and stayed a week or two, resting their wings and gorging on the short, alkali grass at the water's edge. On our trapline, any meat killed after the middle of the October will soon freeze solid and stay frozen until late in the following March. If the wilderness was unable to supply us a turkey for the nearing Christmas, it could give us a goose. Taking the 10-gauge shotgun down from its pegs on the cabin wall, I saddled up a couple of horses, and with Veasy on the rump of Lillian's mare, we went about the job of hanging us up some geese. This demanded teamwork between Lillian and me, as well as the need to curb Veasy's exuberant spirits for a few minutes, so that he wouldn't flush the geese before everything was ready. First, we must check on the wind, for when leaving the water, Canada geese always take off against the wind, never with it. Satisfied on that score, I spent several minutes seizing situation up, deciding what course the geese would take when they became airborne. Then I whispered to Lillian, "I'll snake around and hide myself in that patch of timber at the south end of the lake. Allow me 10 minutes to go into position, and then you bust out of the woods at a gallop. That should put them off the water right." "How am I going to tell when the 10 minutes are up when neither of us has a watch?" she objected. But now a few of these geese were impatiently chattering to one another, as resting geese often will when they're thinking about flying off. I had to get off into my hiding place. "You'll just have to guess," was the only advice I could give her as I sneaked away through the trees. But Lillian always played it safe. It was more like half an hour than any 10 minutes before she moved out of the timber to flush the geese. Although how she managed to keep Veasy quiet that long is something I'll never know. But anyway, she came. Sometimes at a trot, often at a gallop, confusing the geese and pushing them lower over my head, a perfect shot for any gunner.